Hello, I'm Jackie Barry. It's me with Shelle Charvet, who is the author of a best-selling book, Words That Change Minds. And look, I've got edition 2, so I've had this a long time. And now I have got, proudly, the latest version, which is the 3rd edition. And it's something I refer to regularly. Hello, Shelle.
Hello, Jackie.
How can you adapt the techniques, the advice, all that knowledge and wisdom from your Words That Change Minds book into Words That Change an Audience Mind?
Well, there's a number of steps. First of all, can I decode your question? Because doing that is kind of an answer to what we're doing. So your question was, how can we use language? Your question was not, what are all the ways we can use language? And for me, who's listening to below conscious motivators, the question how, if I'm going to answer it properly, needs to be a step-by-step process. If you were to ask me a how question, I said, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. After answer 3, you're in overwhelm, because that's not what you asked for. You didn't ask for options. You asked for how to do it. So step number 1, now answering the question, is I believe it's really important to go to your audience's bus stop, their unconscious bus stop, which is all about how they think, how they feel, how they get motivated, how they make decisions. And we need to know how to get to their bus stop. The vast majority of us use language that fits for how we think, or even worse, how we think they think. So what I want to do is actually talk about some of those triggers that represent the bus stop. The one we just brought up is, does a person want to know how to do something, or why to do something, all the different ways of doing something? Well, it'd be useful to know that before you start to address your audience.
And I know I've found when I'm training a group, sometimes someone will ask me a question and I'll reply, well, I can't advise you what to do because you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. It's not for me to tell you which is right for you. You have to decide. And I'm very aware they're not asking me for a choice.
This is such a great example, Jackie. The art form is to switch your language so it fits their bus stop. And you might then say, well, the first step is to know what you're trying to achieve. Step 2 is this, then step 3 is this. And when someone needs how to answer a procedures or process answer, you need to give them the last step, because they're driven to complete. And then you will get feedback, oh yeah, that's just what I needed. And you can say the same answer in the form of a process rather than a bunch of options.
Brilliant. I have come across that time and again. And because of reading your book, I know then what they're doing and what I'm doing and why there's a mismatch.
And that's one of the critical, what I like to call motivation triggers. And there's a few other critical triggers. And people have their preferences, and they have their own way of speaking, either in writing, presenting, training, etc. And it's really useful to be able to zoom out, notice what patterns you're using in different contexts, and then get some evidence for what are the patterns your audiences need and when. Because this is not a personality profile. You're not a options kind of person, because that makes no sense. It's that you were in an options mode. Someone else is in a procedures mode. And the work that I do is to help people understand what are the sequences of patterns, triggers, their audience goes through. Like, let's take a couple of examples. If you are a presenter and you're introduced to an audience and the audience doesn't know you, well, they could be a little bit skeptical, maybe. If you're a member of a non-white male group, chances are you have to earn credibility as opposed to being given credibility, which means you've got to know how to do that, which probably means if you imagine that your audience might be a little bit skeptical and a little bit critical, how can you address that right away? Well, I'd like to talk about what to avoid first. And this goes for writing as well. Avoid enthusiasm and command language. Now, this is cultural. As a Canadian and a Brit, my levels of overwhelming enthusiasm, amazing kind of stuff. I don't normally use that, but I work with a lot of people from the States. And in America, there's a belief, a below conscious belief, that if you're not enthusiastic about something, you don't really believe in it, and therefore you're not congruent. Whereas when you get to Northern Europe or even the Far East, and Canada, I mean, when we hear American speakers, a lot of us are going, well, take what that person said and divide by 10, like the old Monty Python routine. And it's too much, it's too in your face. So let's imagine somebody's skeptical and you're enthusiastic. It can increase the level of skepticism. Oh, yeah, and does it slice bread too? You know, really, give me a break here. So avoid too much enthusiasm for your culture, for your audience. And the second thing to avoid is talking about how all the benefits, all the advantages, what in my book I call toward language, at least at the very beginning. Because if they're skeptical and you're too enthusiastic and you're talking about all the wonderful things that happen, you are not at their bus stop. So I'd like to use this very visual metaphor, the bus stop. The bus stop of a slightly cynical or skeptical audience is, I want to decide for myself about the things I agree and disagree. And in Words That Change Minds, we call this internal. I decide based on what's important to me, and I don't want to be told what to think or what to do. This is the right solution for you if you have blah, 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 blah. Hey, wait a minute. I'll decide what is the right solution for me. You give me some evidence and I'll evaluate it for myself. Now, the problem with audiences that are highly internal is that they don't try on your ideas, whether you're writing to them or presenting or training. They evaluate your ideas. So as long as they stay in this internal mode, nothing really goes in. It bounces off like Teflon. So in my mind, because I would hate to tell you what to do, I think it's important to use the patterns and the structure and the language that goes with an internal person. So can I give an example?
Of course.
Okay, that was an example. I asked for permission with audiences. Even when I'm writing, I say, would you like an example of that? Of course, nobody answers back in writing, but in their heads they do. Right? So in this case, how you would do that is you offer information and invite the other person to decide. So statistics show that many people blah, 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 blah. But that may not be true for you. What's your situation? Do you find X, Y, Z, A, B, C? See, that's an offer that someone who's in internal mode gets to take in and judge for themselves. And when they say yes, because you figured out what their situation is, you suddenly get a credibility point. You know, you want to have at least 3 credibility points before taking anybody anywhere. But that would be one way to do that. You offer information and you invite people to decide.
2 questions for you then. How can you tell if your audience is internal, and what do you do if you find they're external?
So A, assume they're internal unless you get proof to the contrary. Like, don't assume just because you got this fantastic introduction from somebody, or that you're such a great copywriter, or people love your product, so they're already bought in. Assume that they're a bit skeptical. And if you address that skepticism, it kind of brings everybody along. If you're presenting online or in person, that's an incredibly powerful thing.
We've discussed 3 patterns already. Options and procedures is one, towards and away you mentioned, and now we've got internal, external as well. Knowing that my book is all about audience engagement, I've got another how question for you. How do you set up an audience if you know you want to do audience participation with them?
How? So we're going to go how. I want to tell you one other thing about your question, if I may decode the other part of your question, because people don't ever do just one thing. So in your question, there were 2 patterns that were embedded, okay? So yours was how to and achieve this goal. How to set it up so that people get engaged. Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
Let's go with
So
that.
you have a goal. You didn't phrase it as how to solve this problem. You didn't say, Shelley, how would you overcome a lack of engagement? Or how would you reduce resistance to engagement? You didn't say that. So you're not trying to move away from a problem. You're trying to get to a specific outcome, which is get an audience set up to engaged. Now, on the audience's side, they have a different trigger. Many people in an audience, particularly if they're shy or whatever, they don't feel like it, or if they got a runny nose, or I don't care, whatever, have a reason for, I don't feel like it today. And sometimes it's worse than that. It's, I'm not that kind of person, which is an identity statement, which is a lot heavier than I don't feel like it today. So that one of the things you want to do is go to that bus stop, okay, and help them figure that it maybe it's okay. Maybe there's no danger to get on the bus. And I've seen you do this before. One of the things you do is you raise the objection. When someone has an objection, they want you as a writer, as a presenter, to understand the objection. You know, role playing isn't for everybody because we never learned how to do it. And, you know, I know some people who are not that keen on doing it until they find out that if they don't do it, they may not be able to use the technique that we're teaching. And so I'd leave it up to you. If it's really important to you, language for internals, to learn the techniques that we're talking about, I invite you just to give this a try. All right, so that's a kind of setup for your skeptics. And you say, for the others who are raring to go to jump in here, woo! Let's make sure we give space for everyone so we can all get something important out of this.
So what tools and activities and exercises have you used to bring, this is another word we haven't discussed yet, the fun into a presentation, if that's appropriate for your client and your brand and your outcome for the session?
Okay, now not everybody can do this, Jackie, but I'm weird, and I think the camera is an opportunity to do all kinds of weird things with people. I think your professional microphone is a chance to change your tone. So I like to entertain. So I am here to do entertaining. But that's not the only thing. I think if you have exquisite ideas, you can turn them into very simple activities. And the reason I say very simple is I want to be an expert in the things I'm an expert in and not have to spend a million hours learning technologies that I may use now and then. I actually love polling because people want to find out where they are. So in lab profile terms, one of the polls I use that just knocks people right out of the water is so simple I can't believe it. And I invite everyone to think of what's a simple question you could ask people that can really grab their attention. So I will be with a group and I've explained to them the difference between why and how. Why is about options and how is about a procedure. Then I ask them in the poll, what would you like to do now? Find other ways to apply this material, or option two is learn how to apply the material. I did this for a group last week and it was 50-50. And then of course we decoded what the question was because they hadn't paid attention to the below conscious pattern in the question. And they went, I said, well, imagine what you can find out with a simple poll by you asking about certain things that you're teaching about. I also like to ask people their opinion for things. The chat is amazing for opinions when we're in online programs. I ask them for their opinions in in-person gatherings by telling the next person. This is so much better for most people than role plays. They don't have to, I gotta, but everybody has an opinion and people love to give their opinions. So those are some of the ways that I like to engage people. And when I have I was going to say bilingual, but that's not the word. When I have in person and remote
Hybrid.
people, yeah, blended. That's it. Bilingual started with a B. Okay. Then we have people in the chat and in pairs. It works really, really well. So let me know in the chat and look at everybody's in the chat. Tell your partner, and then we share some of them. Recently, I did a short production, and there were a lot of people who were newly developing websites, newly thinking about how they're going to promote their products. And I had them make a divine strategy. We were all online. They had to do one line of what their problem was, one line of what the solution is. And then we edited, I copy edited it with all of them. And by the time we got to the end of it, they were doing it for themselves because they understood some of those principles. Well, even if we weren't doing yours, they were riveted because they could see sculpture happening in real time, right? So those kind of hot seat activities where everybody gets to learn, I find, people can't ignore them. They are definitely unboring, in my opinion. When people learn the lab profile, they think, oh, well, maybe what pattern should I use? How would I know? What if everybody's different? Well, everybody is different. And one to many is not about the differences inside your audience. One to many is what are the patterns they have in common. And I think if you're thinking about doing an analysis using the different lab profile patterns of your audience, whether it be for direct marketing or presenting, zoom out. You say, well, some of them will be like this, some of them will be like this. Then zoom out even further. What would be one way of thinking or one common thought? That's the content that would be common to a lot of them. And you better be careful about what you say because your audience is going to fact check you before you finish the end of your sentence. So you can test things out very quickly. Oh, according to this site, it says, there's that interactivity. So you can test things immediately by observing and getting feedback.
Would people think this is manipulative?
And, that is not okay to pretend to have rapport with us and with a topic of conversation that was in a string. That's not okay. And then twist it by using verbal techniques, as some people say, and it's now become apparent that. And I think a lot of us, even if we can't identify the techniques used, we have radar. We kind of have radar for people's intentions. And so I don't think it's in anyone's best long-term interest to have a manipulative objective in mind. I'm going to get this from you. I mean, only if you want a short-term relationship.
Right? It's the importance of authenticity, as always.
Yeah. We've taken this Words That Change Minds model with these different patterns, and we've embedded them in two different technologies. Our free technology is a smartphone app. You can download it on your phone. It's for free. It's called Husband Motivator. So it's a free app. Now, it works on wives, works on bosses, works on other kinds of spouses, as well as children and maybe parents. But it was designed for men and women with husbands. And it is contextual. So after you put your husband's name and your heart name for your husband or your wife, whoever, you then choose a context. And the app asks you 4 questions about your husband so that you can think about his bus stop, and then gives you the 4-step motivation method. Very easy to use, but it's customized to the patterns your husband had. So now it may be hard to remember the 4-step motivation method with the specific language in it. So one of the options you can do is email it to yourself. And this is all for free. And it'll teach you about what are these patterns and how to use it in a persuasive text. So that's completely complimentary. If you go to husbandmotivator.com on your phone, it'll give you the link to the Android store or the Apple store. So
and just to double check, that works for one-to-many as well as one-to-one.
Right. It works to one-to-many because you can analyze based on the questions asked. What are the motivators for your audience? And then, of course, it's your choice to use the 4-step motivating method or not. Up to you. Yeah.
And we're not suggesting here that people necessarily need more than one husband at a time.
No, but you could. This app allows you to save as many husbands as you like in as many contexts as you like. So you could.
You've always been very forward thinking, Shelle. As you said, there is so much more on this subject. Where can people go if they want to discover what you do and where you do it and how?
Well, my website is Words That Change Minds. And on the website is a button somewhere that says test your influence. And you can find out what your own patterns are in the context of communication at work. So you can get your own report back. And then if you're happy to do so, you can receive emails from me about free online trainings that I offer and events coming up, etc. So wordsthatchangeminds.com. I would be delighted to hear from you.
That does sound really useful. And we're both in the business of easing communication for the people who hire us. And one of the ways I do it is through some activity ideas that speakers and trainers can adapt to suit their own outcome and their own style. And the way you do it is through the power of language. And thank you for doing it and for spending this time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. This has been a pleasure.